this is how you fix systemic racism.
I don't believe the United States is a racist country. Yeah. If you disagree, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
So it was interesting to me at the beginning, you said you don't think it's a racist country today. Do you think that at some point it was a racist country?
Yes.
Okay,
so that's why I'm not saying that the United States was never a racist country.
Yeah.
I think slavery was a horrible evil, of course.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to say that. 2 questions to own Steven Crowder in 1 second. Did you think it was racist at some point? What was the specific event that caused it to suddenly not be racist anymore? I think slavery was horrible, of course. Of course I think that. Of course.
I'm not at all here to argue that the United States was never a racist nation. Every single nation since the dawn of civilization has practiced slavery in one form or another. It's still practiced across the globe. Thank God we abolished it.
But like ancient Roman slavery is very different from chattel slavery. Yeah, racism is just slavery, but also the way that America did slavery was worse than it was ever done. Worse, and on a global scale. On a scale that had never been done, with, more people it had ever been done to, and for longer. It's like Holocaust levels of bad, and had that, like an equivalent rippling effect across the world.
Yeah, so just my question up front for you is, at what point did we stop being racist? Was when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, or when? Yeah,
I would say after the Civil Rights Act.
So the day
that everyone was given. No, I mean systemically, yeah.
So the Civil Rights Act was signed. Every state law changed. Every county law changed. Every city council charter, and it all went into effect then. The very hour the ink dried on the fucking Civil Rights Act. That's like saying when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, every slave was immediately freed. No one was enslaved anymore. That's not true. That's why we have fucking Juneteenth.
Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't individual racists.
Yeah.
And particularly when I'm talking about 2020, because most of the people out there protesting are not the people who were around during the Civil Rights era. You have a lot of young Americans who have never suffered at the hands of systemic oppression.
Okay. In your science specifically, you're talking about systemic oppression?
Yes.
Okay.
Not racist individuals. There are plenty of racist individuals, and you can find those black, white.
And none of them hold positions of power ever anywhere.
I'm not arguing that there are not individual racists, but as a country, the United States, not only do I believe that it's the best country in the world for people of any races.
I agree that overall we are the best country in the world. I agree with that. Yeah. But I think the main place where I disagree, perhaps not, we don't have systemic racism.
Already backing down. You lose. You fail. You lost the whole argument.
But I think that whenever you think about racism, you have to keep in mind classism. I think that systemically there are a lot of systems that do divide classes and keep lower classes suppressed. And because of our history, because of the way that black people and many brown people were treated in the past, we are tied into lower classes. And you have to keep in mind that when you're talking about racism, oftentimes people actually mean classism, and the two are very closely intertwined. When you look at the numbers, it's how it is.
Well, let me ask you kind of to define classism and how you think that there's systemic oppression through the form of classism.
Prison system, the military being a poverty draft, the policing system, underfunded schools. I can go on.
If you look at job opportunities, oftentimes people say, go ahead, get a 4-year degree. That's going to give you more job opportunities. But for people who are completely broke, oftentimes 4-year degrees are just not opportunities that they have because they can't go into that financial deficit, and they don't have the time to be able to get those degrees and things like that. I think there are a number of things that, and I didn't come here prepared today to
list them off.
So I think it'll be helpful as we talk, so I can kind of.
And you would say that would apply to someone who's poor, who's white, just as much as someone who's poor is black. Like the trailer park kid from Arkansas is at just as much of a disadvantage as the poor black child from South.
Well, I think that
just as much, except the white trailer park kid in Arkansas is like 5 times less likely to get killed by a cop. More likely to have their father in their lives because of over-policing in black communities. More likely to come from intergenerational wealth. More likely to get job opportunities, to get enrolled into college.
Well, I think that the poor trailer park trash people in Arkansas.
I didn't say trash.
I did. I'm not mincy about words.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm concerned about the meaning behind it. I don't get triggered by the misuse of pronouns and shit.
That's awesome. He got off on that one. Look at him.
I'm concerned about the meaning behind it. I don't get triggered by the misuse of pronouns and shit.
Let me ask you this.
I don't get triggered by pronouns.
Do you think most black people think the way you do?
No, absolutely not.
You think they are offended by words?
I think most people in general are offended by words.
Okay, because generally speaking,
I think I'm a rare
the people that I've met most average black Americans, not those in the media, don't tend to be nearly as sensitive as privileged white people about words.
White people just have more privilege to be able to speak up about certain topics. It's like the basis of privilege. You know, say what you want. Trans people are extremely marginalized all over the world. But a white trans woman or a white trans man or a white non-binary person coming out in like a public way still has less of a likelihood to be killed as a black person does. The black trans murder rate is just higher. So white people still have that ability to like speak more comfortably.
So going back to classism, do you believe that it would be the same disadvantage for someone who is poor in a lower class trailer trash white person from Arkansas as, let's say, a kid from inner city South Dallas, or they don't?
No, not quite, because of the stereotypes and the presumptions that people carry. I think that when a white person walks into the public, people oftentimes go in with a more neutral idea of what they could be. They have less assumptions and whatnot. Just like, okay, look in this room right now. I'm the only black person right now.
Well, you weren't. There were other black guys.
His ass is not listening.
I'm out ratioed right now, right?
Well, can I say something right there?
Yeah.
Because I will tell you this. There have been some people who've come up who've been unsavory characters, and you would not be Now, I will acknowledge this. Sometimes you make assumptions when you see somebody. For example, if I see a guy with a Hell's Angels jacket, I go, ooh, let me be careful. Or if he's, got a teardrop tattoo. You would be someone here I would think, oh, that's someone who's dressed well, is articulate.
Bro, you can't say that. He said you're one of the good ones.
So I don't necessarily think that, at least in my experience, and with everyone I know who works on my crew, and we do have black people, and we do have Latinos.
Diversity quotas.
Yeah, it is.
He said, we have black people and Latino people working here. And my guy said, diversity quotas. What if I just stole Steven Crowder's Change My Mind bit in its entirety, but did leftist things instead? Because here's the thing. I'm smarter than Steven Crowder. I wouldn't get as many people. It wouldn't be as like agitating. But like the people that would come up would be so stupid. That's a good idea. I'm going to write it down.
What's interesting is when you look at the classism, first off, we have more class mobility here in the United States than anywhere else. Certainly than Canada.
Can you define class mobility for me?
Meaning there are more people in the United States who end up in the top 30% of income than anywhere else in the world at some point in their life, or in the top 10%, including people go from the top 10, up from the bottom 10 or the bottom 30 to the top 30. There's more class mobility here in the United States, more ability to rise out of poverty into upper middle class than anywhere else in the world. It's not even close.
Your zip code is the best way to determine your future income. The zip code of where you grew up.
And it's even interesting where you take people where they might have a higher overall quality of living, like Sweden or Denmark, and you take Swedes or Danes and you bring them to the United States, and they have a higher class mobility and higher quality of living here in the United States.
Yeah, because they come from money. Because they have the money to move across the world to a worse country. And also, they're the whitest you could possibly be. They're like Aryan.
Because I think we acknowledge that different countries have different cultures, and sometimes they're more studious, sometimes there are cultures that are more industrious. But when you transplant any culture to the United States...
Yeah, any. Also, do you guys know it's either Nigeria or Ethiopia has the highest percentage of PhDs in America? Because the people still come from money. But Steven Crowder doesn't know that because he's racist. He's making too many concessions because this guy's not a leftist. He's like a fucking debate pervert.
I shouldn't say any, but all the stats that we have available to us, the best parts of their cultures that they bring actually are accentuated, and we see more of that.
Yeah, I also think it's kind of interesting. Well, when you say transplant in the United States, can you be more specific on the areas? I think...
Well, I just use like Sweden and Denmark as an example.
I've been where in the United States when they've been transplanted to...
See what I mean? Debate pervert.
Anywhere
in the United States.
I doubt many of them are going, to the middle of Mississippi.
But I think that's part of the issue. When you look at rural areas, when you look at ghettos, where a lot of these lower income people are, where a lot of black people are, oftentimes...
And white people.
More so
and white people. Don't forget about that. Don't forget about white people. It's like, yeah, more black people, though. More black people and a higher percentage of black people.
More so black people oftentimes, statistically, when you look at our proportion of this society, I think
there are more white people on welfare than black people.
There are more white people in the United States.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the percentage, dipshit? What's the percentage, dipshit? What's the percentage of people per capita? Are you dumb?
Well, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying
But
as
when you
far as
look
a
at the
total
ratio,
number, yeah, I understand. when you look
I'm
at the
talking about
ratio.
population ratio per capita wise.
Yeah, the proportion. Yeah, I understand. You're right, but I'm gonna keep lying.
You do have more black people who are poor than white
Yeah,
people.
and I
Okay, why, Stephen? Do you think it's because systemic racism exists, or do you think black people are just inferior? Because those are the only two options. Do you think it's all just individual choices made by all black people? Because that's literally the most racist thing you can think. I mean, we know what he thinks. We know.
And why do you think that is?
mainly because of the history of the United States, the discrimination that has happened in the past, the disadvantage that we were in the past. You know, we started so far behind in this race, so like there's only so far that as a collective we're going to be now.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 19.
19.
19 and a half.
So you believe that, let's say, a 19-year-old yourself.
Yeah.
You seem like a pretty articulate guy. You going to school?
Dude, stop saying articulate. Stop saying articulate. That's so fucked up.
You believe that at this point you are feeling the ripple effects from slavery in the history of the United States and that you face systemic discrimination?
I think there have definitely been times in my life and places that I've been where I have felt the effects. I think overall, I grew up in a very privileged family. My parents, they make good money.
Do you have both parents?
Yeah, and that's the other
huge.
thing. That's also
Far
a
bigger
huge
than
thing.
any other statistic.
Yeah.
Because when you take, that's something that I think is important, and maybe we could find common ground. When you take upper middle class white kids or black kids, they perform typically the same. When you take lower class white kids or black kids, they often perform the same. When you take any class of kids without a dad, they perform very poorly.
Yeah. Where are all the black men? Do you think they all just individually chose not to be there for their kids? Or do you think there's a systemic reason that black fatherlessness is a thing? Do you think it also has something to do with the disproportionate and extreme number of black people in prison? Do you think it has anything to do with that? Do you think there's any connection there?
If you want to avoid being in poverty, there are three things that you can do. It's very simple. Go to school, don't commit a crime, wait till you're married to have kids.
Right.
Yeah, don't do crime. Easy. People do crime because they feel like it. That's the only reason.
So I want to hear
That's it.
your opinion on this. Why do you think that oftentimes more black children have to grow up in one household families? I want to hear yours.
Can I speak freely without being accused of racism?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it goes back to the welfare reform, and it goes back to the model cities program.
Welfare reform under who? Bill Clinton, who made it harder to get welfare?
It goes back to a welfare state created that disincentivizes people from staying married.
That's crazy. So I let's say I get married to a woman and we have children. I want to divorce her so we can't get on welfare. That's not how welfare works.
Oh my God.
Just not it.
There's a financial incentive right now to not be married.
So if that incentive is there, why is it only happening to black families?
Because there's a higher percentage of black families who use welfare than white families.
And why is that? Because
Well, at a certain point, though, you do have to end that cycle. There is a responsibility.
Well, at a certain point, So you are saying individually, black people just do this. They all make this choice collectively.
Your parents chose to stay together, right?
Sure.
That cycle can only be broken through personal responsibility.
He's changing the subject.
At a
but
certain
before
point when
we
you
stray
create-
too far away from that,
Sure.
why are more black families on welfare?
But why were more black families not getting divorced? Why do they have stronger family households before the modern welfare state?
Because there was a lower marriage rate. It depends on what welfare reform he's even talking about.
In other words, blacks had a lower divorce rate. They had a lower fatherless household rate before the modern. We get it. Careful, there's a lot of connotations there.
Sure.
What did he do? Did he just do the white power symbol? Is he doing this? Oh, he did this. He said tiny dick. Okay. He said tiny dick and Steven got offended.
They had stronger family units before the modern welfare state.
That's crazy. Also, they had less of them. And over-policing remains a problem and has only gotten worse.
But stronger. Now, that was also sold to them from the Democratic Party. It was sold to them as something that was owed to them through reparations, right? This was a big part of. They targeted black areas and encouraged them to get on welfare. And then through that point, continuing through that end, they then created financial incentives to not be married. And at a certain point, I do believe when all rights are equal, since the 1960s, as far as the right to vote, when we're talking about the right to own property, redlining has been stopped.
Redlining didn't stop in the 60s, Stephen. Also, redlining wasn't even made illegal by the Civil Rights Act.
And there are systemic advantages afforded to minorities, not afforded to white people. There does have to be, considering that we know how beneficial and how much of a privilege, there's no greater privilege than being raised in a household with a mother and a father, that some personal responsibility does need to come into account. And that someone today who chooses to walk out on their wife has nothing to do with the Emancipation Proclamation.
Why would you think someone would choose to walk out? Again, there's a higher amount of black men in prison than any other demographic in America, despite them not being the biggest by a lot.
What do you think the solution is? What do you think the end game is?
It's very tough to propose a solution because the solution can only come from the ground up through family units.
The solution is the traditional family. Okay, Stephen.
Through moral character and teaching people to stay with their kids. Because like I said, I think if we educate young people, white and black, listen, be responsible, don't commit crimes, graduate school, wait till you're married to have kids.
You think people aren't taught that? That's exactly what everyone is taught, culturally and through the education system. The best thing to do when you're poor is have a big family. True. Except Steven's the exact same person to like make fun of a Hispanic family for being really big. He'll be like, oh, that Hispanic family over there with the 12 kids. Like that's the kind of shit he would say.
Going back to education, I think primary and secondary education is also a very big issue. People who grow up in less fortunate areas, people who grow up in ghettos, oftentimes they don't get the best primary education. And you're saying that the way to fix the nuclear family is to further educate these people, right?
Well, no, I didn't say that. I said we need to have a nuclear family, not to fix. There is no nuclear family in the black community a lot of the time.
All right, maybe I misheard you, but a few moments ago,
I said to encourage a nuclear family. That means a mother, father, and children. In other words,
you used the word education earlier, so that's.
We need to educate young people. Yeah. But I don't necessarily mean that comes through school.
What? He has him backing off. Like Steven Crowder is crumbling when all this guy did was ask him what he said. And he's just like, well, I didn't actually say that. Oh, well, I did say that. It was earlier, but with education. Yeah, but that doesn't come from school. Holy shit. He was just trying to clarify something he said like 10 seconds ago.
Yeah,
if it's not coming from school,
well, I think it needs to come from leaders from both communities. I mean, let me ask you this: how much have you learned in school versus how much have you learned from people you respect or books that you read on your own or authoritative figures?
Not nearly as much as what you learned from school. You learn everything at school.
Far more from the latter.
Me too.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a responsibility for people to step up in positions of power, authority, who can inform. That's what I'm doing.
But I also...
Like, you notice how that's not a real solution? He's like, people should just stand up. People's got to stand up and start declaring for the nuclear family. Like, that's not a real solution whatsoever.
But I also think that's a learned skill. I think we should teach people how to learn for themselves.
Okay.
And I think that we can teach that in our school systems.
Primary schools.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, and I agree. I think that schooling is important. I come from a place like I was raised in Canada.
Yeah.
Born in Detroit, raised in Canada, and they do have a much better public education system.
Not because they teach the nuclear family, but because they're not underfunded.
Because you can go to pretty much any school you want as long as you're willing to drive or take a bus. It's what we call school choice here. And
that's not what school choice is, you stupid dipshit.
So what do you believe the problem is in primary education? Or because I definitely believe that our public education system, I think we're referring to public education.
Yeah.
Right? Is broken and needs improvement. And you think that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Definitely.
What do you believe is broken there? And how do you think we can maybe fix it?
Hard to say as someone who's not an educator, but I think that generally schools that have better funding and then have a staff that knows how to use that funding are going to be better off in the end. So we need to have better training for the faculty of the schools so that they can know how to allocate these funds properly.
Like, this sucks. This is how you know you're really talking to a debate pervert, is that all his solutions are bureaucratic messes of like, we need to develop systems to teach administrations of schools. Like, our system's much too broken for that. Like, that's a solution like 2 years into a problem, not like 150 years into a problem. And it waters down the responsibility of him to actually come up with a real solution, because he's like, oh, well, someone will figure it out along this fucking pool of people I fucking listed. He's doing his best? No. He's like a Steven Crowder fan. This is like the least racist Steven Crowder fan.
How do you get better training?
by creating better programs.
And that requires money.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with you in the sense that obviously people, if you have to go to public schools, I think homeschooling is a big option now. We've seen with the COVID-19 that people can do it.
I think homeschool is a very 50-50 with the results.
Sometimes we have quite a few homeschool people on the staff. And
I'm a homeschool kid
Oh,
myself,
really?
yeah.
Oh, no, your mom must have been terrible.
Not always. I love you, Mom. I love you, Mom. I'm just going to leave it at that.
No, he doesn't. He said that you place him in a burlap bag and beat him with reeds.
I didn't say that.
But the thing is, a lot of the most
Weird thing to say.
most funded school districts in the country are underprivileged areas. So, for example, you have like Washington, D.C., you have Detroit. These are areas specifically where you're talking about, and they have higher per pupil spending than most schools on average, certainly more than many.
That's why earlier I said I think we need to better allocate our funds. Just more money isn't always the answer.
Right.
We need to know how to spend the money.
It's just we're talking in circles. Like, imagine making the point that schools don't need more money. He's so naturally racist. Yeah, this is like the subtle American racism that just exists in like everyday conversation from like people who don't have any critical thinking and can't like understand why calling a black kid articulate is an insane thing to do. He doesn't even realize he's doing it. Steven realizes. I think he does that shit like half subconsciously. It's not completely subconscious.
So it sounds like you'd be advocating for something like school choice. Sounds like you'd be advocating for incentives for better teachers, more punishments for teachers who are bad, whose students don't
Definitely.
do well.
All things I also agree would probably work in the police force.
Oh my God. He wants to be a cop.
I agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. That's the thing for me. I've been saying for a long time, we need to reduce the power of teachers unions who protect bad teachers, to encourage good teachers. And the same exact thing with the cops. Do we agree on that?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I agree we need to defund the police unions. That's true.
Yeah.
Hey, look
Absolutely.
at that.
Watch Louder with Crowder live, Monday through Thursday.
No. I don't think I will. That was pretty fucking rough.